The night the storm swallowed the backroad whole, nobody expected to find anything still breathing out there. What the rescue team found instead, pressed into a hollow of snow like two stones forgotten by the world, would quietly change every one of them, though none of them knew it yet. It started with a radio call just after 9. The dispatcher's voice cut through the static in short, clipped sentences. Hikers had reported 2 animals down on the logging road off Route 7. What looked like injured lynxes, curled together in the snow near the tree line. The hikers hadn't stopped long. Visibility was dropping fast, and the temperature was falling with it. By the time they called it in, they were already back in their car with the heat running, unsure of what they'd actually seen. That uncertainty is the thing about blizzard country. It strips your confidence along with your warmth. Ranger Dale Hutchins was the first to volunteer for the call. He'd been doing wildlife rescue for going on 17 years, working out of the small rehab center tucked into the valley outside Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. He pulled on a second jacket without being asked, and radioed his colleague Sarah, who met him at the truck with a crate, 2 blankets, and a thermos she didn't offer to share. That was their rhythm. Efficient, quiet, no wasted motion. The drive up the mountain took 40 minutes in weather that deserved twice that long. The headlights punched a narrow tunnel through the white, and beyond that tunnel, nothing, just the sound of wind pressing itself against the windshield like something trying to get in. Pine branches sagged under the weight of ice, and occasionally cracked somewhere deep in the dark, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the storm. Sarah kept her eyes on the tree line. Dale kept his on the road. Neither of them spoke much. The road narrowed as it climbed. Snowdrift pressed in from both shoulders, erasing the edges, making each curve a small act of faith. At mile marker 11, Dale slowed the truck to a crawl. There, Sarah pointed. 2 shapes, huddled at the base of a pine where a slight overhang of rock had provided maybe a foot of shelter from the worst of the wind. Small, still, pressed together so tightly they read as a single form in the headlights. Dale exhaled slowly. At that distance, in that light, they looked like something the mountain had already finished with. He cut the engine, and they moved on foot, quiet and careful, using flashlights aimed low so as not to startle. The snow came to their knees in places. The cold was the kind that doesn't announce itself. It simply reaches inside, and begins pulling heat from the places you thought were protected. They moved without rushing. Wild animals in distress can die from panic as quickly as from injury, and every rescuer learns that lesson early and carries it always. They were bobcats, not lynxes, a distinction that only matters to the people who track such things, and means nothing to a wild animal shivering in a snowdrift. The larger of the 2 had her body curved around the smaller, her chin resting low, eyes closed. Dale crouched and held his flashlight steady. For a long moment he said nothing. "They're not moving," Sarah said softly. "I know." He reached forward with 2 gloved fingers, and pressed gently at the side of the larger one's neck, then stopped, pressed again. "She's alive." His voice came out quieter than he intended. "She's breathing." He checked the second. Faint warmth, a shiver so slight it could have been the wind moving fur, but it was there. A tremor from somewhere deep inside, some part of the animal still holding on without quite understanding why. They worked without speaking. Sarah unfolded the first blanket, and Dale lifted the smaller bobcat with both hands, feeling the terrible lightness of her, the way her body offered no resistance. He wrapped her carefully, tucked her into the first crate. The larger female stirred when he reached for her. A low sound, something between a growl and a moan, but she had nothing left to fight with. Her claws found no purchase. She went still again as he wrapped her, her head lolling against his arm, her breath shallow and fast. Sarah latched the second crate, and they carried them back to the truck without speaking. The wind had picked up. The trees groaned. On the drive back down the mountain, Dale kept the heat running high. Sarah sat in the rear with the crates, one hand resting on each latch, watching. The smaller bobcat had gone quiet, either resting or fading. It was impossible to tell. But the larger female was restless in a way that made Sarah lean closer. She was shifting her body in the crate, pressing and releasing, her sides drawing in with an irregular rhythm that didn't match distress. Not exactly. It matched something else, something Sarah had seen once before, years ago, with a white-tailed deer that had come into the center half-frozen. "Dale," she said. He met her eyes in the rear-view mirror. "She's not injured." Sierra kept her voice level, but her hand went still on the crate latch. "She's in labor." The truck was quiet for a moment, just the heater and the road and the storm pressing in from all sides. She hadn't been shielding another Bobcat out there in the snow. She had been shielding the lives she was carrying, the ones not yet born, the ones that had no voice yet in any of this. And somehow, through the cold and the starvation and the long, impossible night, she had held on long enough for a set of headlights to find her. Dale pressed the accelerator down and said nothing. There was nothing to say. They had maybe 20 minutes. The wildlife center at night has a particular kind of quiet, not peaceful but held, like a room full of people trying not to breathe too loud. They had Mara on a heated pad within 4 minutes of arrival. That's what they called her by the end of the first hour, though no one could say exactly who named her first or why it stuck. It simply fit, something about the way she moved, even exhausted, even broken, deliberate, dignified. A name that felt earned rather than given. The smaller female was stabilized in an adjacent enclosure, warmed fluids running, vitals slowly climbing back towards something survivable. She pressed her nose to the mesh partition and did not move from it. Whether she understood what was happening on the other side, no one could say, but she stayed. That much was clear. Mara labored for 3 hours. The team worked around her in near silence, monitoring without crowding, present without imposing. There is a particular skill in wildlife rehabilitation that no certification teaches, the ability to care deeply while taking up as little space as possible. These people had it. They moved like shadows at the edges of the room, whispering to each other in half-sentences, their eyes never leaving her for long. At 2:14 in the morning, the first kitten arrived. It was barely the size of a closed fist. Mara cleaned it with slow, deliberate strokes, her exhaustion visible in every movement but absent from her instincts. Those were intact, ancient and exact. The second kitten came 20 minutes later. The third, another 10 after that. No one in the room spoke. One of the younger volunteers pressed her fingers to her mouth. Dale stood with his arms crossed, not looking away. Sierra wrote in the log with a hand that wasn't entirely steady. All three were breathing. The room didn't erupt. There was no cheer, no celebration, just a long collective exhale. The sound of people setting down something heavy they hadn't realized they'd been carrying. Someone turned the overhead light down a fraction. Someone else quietly refilled the heating pad. The work continued, because it always does. But something had shifted. In the corner enclosure, the smaller female had gone still at the mesh, her nose pressed through the gap, her eyes fixed on the soft sounds coming from across the room. 3 new voices, fragile and insistent and impossibly alive. She had been seconds from death in that snowdrift. All 4 of them had. And yet here, under fluorescent light, and heated blankets and the careful hands of strangers, life had not just survived. It had multiplied. Weeks have a way of softening things. The sharp edges of that night, the cold, the urgency, the weight of not knowing, began to blur as the days stretched into a steadier rhythm. Mara's kittens grew, slowly at first, then with the kind of speed that makes you look twice at something you swore was smaller yesterday. The center changed with them. Staff who used to move through the Bobcat wing with practiced detachment started lingering. A few minutes became 20. Clipboards went unchecked. Someone brought a chair and left it near the observation window, and no one moved it, because everyone understood why it was there. They called them the Snow family, not in any official log, not in any documentation, just in the way people talk when they think no one's listening. How's the Snow family doing today? Already eating, already loud. Mara was a patient mother and a precise one. She taught without theater, a gentle cuff when a kitten wandered too far, a low chirp that brought them back before they knew they'd been called. She showed them how to stalk, how to flatten, how to wait. The kittens tumbled over each other and over her with complete confidence in her steadiness, and she absorbed it all without complaint. The smaller female, who the team had quietly started calling Rue, remained a fixture at the partition. She and Mara communicated in ways too subtle for most people to name, but impossible to miss. A shift in posture, a slow blink, a soft sound that carried no alarm. Whatever their bond was, companion, family, something the wild keeps its own word for, it had survived the mountain. It was still intact. But survival and recovery are not the same thing, and the team knew it. As the kittens grew stronger, the enclosure grew smaller. A wild animal raised in human walls learns the wrong lessons: safety and confinement, comfort and dependence. The team had seen it before. They knew what it cost. They began the transition quietly, without announcement. A larger naturalized enclosure was prepared. Brush, elevation, irregular ground, hiding places that weren't given but discovered. Mara entered it cautiously, nose low, reading everything. Her kittens followed with less caution and more noise. Within a day they were using all of it. Dale watched from outside the fence one evening, as Mara sat elevated on a low platform, still and alert, her gaze aimed at something beyond the tree line, beyond the center, beyond whatever boundary still separated her from where she belonged. She wasn't afraid of the wild. She was remembering it. Spring came the way it always does in the Idaho high country, not with fanfare but with a slow, quiet insistence. Snow retreating inch by inch, ground reappearing like something remembered. The pine forest that had nearly swallowed Mara whole now stood green and dripping, full of sound, full of life, pressing upward from everywhere at once. The team set the release date without much discussion. They all felt it the same morning. The way you feel the end of something before it announces itself. The kittens were strong. Mara was ready. Rue had been ready for weeks. They loaded the carriers just after dawn. The drive up the mountain was quiet. Dale kept both hands on the wheel. Sierra sat in the back, one hand resting on the nearest crate, not gripping, just resting, present. The road climbed through shadow and light, through familiar bends that looked different now with the snow gone, and the world returned to itself. They stopped at a ridge overlooking a long, unbroken stretch of forest, the kind of view that makes you feel small in the best possible way. Dale cut the engine. Nobody moved for a moment. The air coming through the cracked window smelled like pine resin and wet earth, and something wilder underneath, something that didn't have a name, but that Mara's nose found instantly. They opened the carriers and stepped back. Mara came out first. She paused at the edge of the truck bed, ears forward, reading the air with an attention so focused it felt almost solemn. Her kittens pressed behind her, curious and impatient. Rue slipped out to the side, silent as she'd always been. Mara looked out at the tree line. Then she looked back. One long, unhurried glance at the people standing behind her. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It wasn't goodbye. It was something quieter than either. The look of an animal that had taken the full measure of a moment and found it complete. Then she stepped forward, and the forest received her. The kittens followed. Rue followed. Within seconds their spotted coats dissolved into the dappled light beneath the trees, and the ridge was still again. Nobody spoke for a while. 3 weeks later, a motion camera mounted on a trail post captured them. Mara moving through a meadow at the edge of the property, her 3 young following in loose formation behind her. Strong, unhurried. Home. The footage made its way to the center's break room on a Thursday night. Dale watched it twice. Sierra watched it once and didn't say anything, which said everything. She had been rescued from the snow, but what she had truly needed, what she had fought through the cold and the dark and the impossible odds to reach, was simply the chance to lead her own family home. That chance, at least, they had been able to give her.